Awesome. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to session 4, Changing Our Ways, this amazing series. We've had some really great speakers so far. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tony Fitoris. I'm Director of Membership for the ACMP SoCal chapter, and I'm really thrilled to see all of you here. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about today. Betty Magome is joining us. And it's really interesting because for those of us in Southern California, I'm just going to remind everybody, studios, streaming services, financial companies, insurance companies, medical companies. What else we got? What else didn't I talk about? Oh, higher education, all using technologies and devices that don't necessarily operate just on your laptop or, on your phone. So that's why I'm super excited about this, because Betty is really an expert in applying change for emerging technologies. So let me just kind of give everybody an opportunity to get reoriented to us. So welcome to ACMP. SoCal, what do we offer? You kind of see everything we offer on the screen there. And my big call to action for everybody is, if you haven't availed yourself of any of these opportunities, I strongly advise you to. This is a great way to connect and engage with your fellow members. Even if you're not a member of this particular chapter, I mean, we're a fun and awesome group. So, please feel free to reach out to any of us. A big thank you to the board members. This is all the folks that work very, very diligently. ACMP is very lucky we don't charge them by the hour, because let me tell you something, we all work really, really hard on these events. So to all my fellow board members, thank you very much for all of your dedication. So with that being said, let me tell you a little bit about Betty. So Betty Magome is the founder of Nimble Consulting, with over 20 years of management consulting experience from Arthur Andersen, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Point B Consulting in San Francisco. Here's one of the really exciting parts. Betty founded Nimble Consulting in 2010, a woman-owned and minority-owned consulting firm. With success in both organizational transformation and digital transformation, Nimble's expertise leans heavily towards technology and innovation, with demonstrated success in garnering support and adoption of change with various end users. So Betty's got a lot of experience in this realm. I mean, like, a lot. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Betty. Betty, thank you so much. And I am going to close my mouth now.
Great. Well, thank you, Tony, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Betty Magome, and I'm excited to be here today to kickstart a discussion about how we can build a future together as change practitioners. So the theme for this year's symposium is Changing Our Ways, and I'm going to talk about a global change that's coming that I'm very passionate about. Next slide, please. Next slide. Great. As you can see from the table of contents, I'd like to start by sharing how I started on this journey to become a student of how we prepare ourselves and our clients for what is the fourth industrial revolution. Through actual experience working on proof of concept with clients, I'll also talk about opportunities and challenges that come with innovation, as well as key takeaways, whether you're an internal change practitioner or an external consultant. My presentation is about 30 minutes, so I've really trimmed it down for this to be educational, informative, and I have practical examples of what this means for us from a project and an organizational perspective. We also have a few polling questions to keep this interactive and keep you on your toes, and feel free to enter comments or questions in the chat as we go, and we have plenty of time for dialogue and questions at the end. Next slide, please. So Nimble helps design, deliver, and sustain transformational change. We have a strong presence in the West Coast with clients both in the Los Angeles area and the Bay Area. I am based in San Francisco, and it is great to be at the forefront of technology here. And within digital transformation, we do lean heavily towards technology adoption projects. And we generally work with organizations that are ripe for change, whose industries are being disrupted, or where organizational transformation is a critical part of their future success. Next slide, please. So as an early adopter, Nimble Consulting began developing strategic partners to expand the capabilities we can offer. We're best known for organizational change management, but because we're often brought in for transformational change, we provide a team-based approach where we'll come in to provide a combination of capabilities such as OCM and training, or OCM training and process analysis as an example. In blue here on the slide, you'll see where we expanded our ecosystem of partners to include local Bay Area startups focused on emerging technologies such as IoT, or expanded our training capability to include augmented and virtual reality training. And in more recent years, we've done strategy work as clients move into proof of concepts with newer technologies, newer devices, and new business models. But regardless of the business problem or the project, we focus on the impact on people, whether they're employees, customers, and partners. Next slide, please. So I'd like to do an introduction and set the context for everybody. Next slide. So to set context, how many people remember when cloud technology first started to be talked about well over a decade ago? You can raise your hand or comment in the chat. Okay, so if you remember back over 10 years ago, companies began to hire these cloud experts, and organizations felt pressure to take action, but without fully understanding the impact of rapidly moving all of their information into the cloud. Well, fast forward to today, the cloud is such a familiar term. We have it on our phone, our laptops. Companies and organizations have moved to AWS or other cloud platforms as a, quote, obvious direction. And vendors over time matured their cloud technologies. So as a result, over the past 10 years, we built trust with the cloud, we gained knowledge, and we saw it become more and more a part of our everyday life. Well, to set context, this is where we are today with the emerging technology and the new smart or edge devices that I'll be talking about today. So next slide. We have a poll. Before we move forward, I'd love to hear from all of you. How many people here have heard of Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution? And the options are never heard of it, I've heard of it, or I've heard of it and I've read up about it.
Okay, we've got about half the folks in there. Almost. A couple more. Okay. And here are the results.
All right, never heard of it, 33%. Okay, that's a third of you guys. Heard of it, good, about half of you. Oh, good, 20% almost have read up about it. All right, that makes me happy. That means there's a good mix of understanding. So let's move forward. Next slide. Okay, so you'll see these four industries, industry 1 to 4. So as a result of the perfect storm of technologies available in recent years and the new smart devices, the fourth industrial revolution is transforming the way we will live and will radically disrupt almost every business sector. And we've already seen signs of that with how vital just our phones are to us, right? In our everyday life, at work, et cetera. While Industry 4.0 is set to change society like never before, it builds on the foundations laid by the first 3 industrial revolutions. So quick history lesson here for everybody. The advent of the steam engine in the 18th century led to the first industrial revolution, allowing production to be mechanized and driving urbanization. Second industrial revolution, electricity and other scientific advancements led to mass production. And the third industrial revolution, what we're all familiar with, beginning in the 1950s, saw the emergence of computers and digital technology. This led to disrupting not only manufacturing and other industries, but changed how we communicate, how we get information, and how we use various services through our smart devices. So now, as the proliferation of new devices and technologies change what is possible, they're also transforming our future expectations, customer expectations. These expectations then drive organizations to transform. They must transform. And we as change practitioners will support these changes to come. That is why it is important to understand the current fourth industrial revolution underway and to become familiar with what this all means for us. Next slide, please. So let's take it down a few notches. What's new or different about these edge or smart devices and these emerging technologies? Many of us have done a lot of, SAP implementations, large-scale enterprise, software implementations. So what's the difference? Well, a more complex technical and device landscape due to Industry 4.0 presents new opportunities, which are very exciting, but challenges for the organizations that we support. The examples you see on the slide include on the left side an iPad. It shows how to operate equipment as you pan over it, right? Pretty cool. And on the right, you see virtual reality technology that can be used in many industries and for many use cases. So a few examples are viewing real estate as if you were there, right? Or learning how to build equipment in a safe, cost-effective, and interactive way. But it's important to understand the level of maturity with these emerging technologies and devices. That's the difference. So first, there's a reason why they're called emerging. There are many players, such as many startups, traditional vendors, right? And no clear-cut winners. Second, no one company can offer the end-to-end solution from the device, right? In this case, the iPad or the goggles, to the software, right, that's operating with these devices, interacting with them, as well as the AI and the data analytics. There are different companies that have expertise in all of these different areas. Third, connectivity is the key to all of this. All of this requires a new level of connectivity across the devices, the applications, which is unprecedented and challenging from a capacity perspective, data security perspective, and a technology integration perspective. And all of this adds a layer of complexity, both for the project team and the organization, and then to us as the change practitioners. Okay, next slide. We're going to go forward. One more slide, please. We're going to walk through some examples of different emerging technologies and devices. So the first one I'd like to talk about is IoT, or Internet of Things. So I'm sure many of you, all of you have heard of IoT. So IoT is becoming an increasingly growing topic of conversation. IoT describes physical objects that are embedded with sensors, processing ability, software, and they connect with other technologies and exchange data over the internet. So simply put, this is the concept of basically connecting any device with an on and off switch to the internet and connecting the devices to one another. So this could be everything from cell phones, products like Alexa, wearable devices, sensors in cars, to cameras on city infrastructure. IoT is a giant network of connected things. And there is a relationship between devices to other devices, right? Cars speaking to each other, phones kind of speaking to each other, right? We've seen that where we can kind of put our phones near each other and they start kind of interacting. There's a relationship between devices to cloud and then devices to people. So a good visual of the possibilities of IoT on this slide shows what the future could look like. So this is an example of IoT and emerging technologies working in a connected environment, connected being the key word. Here in the Bay Area, you see a lot of electric vehicles, the testing of driverless cars, and the fact that these cars are connected offers new opportunities and benefits. For example, the future could have communication between cars so that as you're driving, your car is communicating with other cars to help with avoiding accidents. Tesla has one in beta mode out for a few years now. Second example is safety and alerts. So electric vehicles such as Tesla have sensors and cameras built into the car that if alerts you via your smartphone if someone is breaking into it. So remember, IoT is about connecting things to one another. Next slide, please. Okay, some more examples of edge devices and sensors and emerging technology. On the left hand of the slide here, in Arizona, everyone knows about a company by the name of Waymo. This is a Google Alphabet subsidiary that rolled out a fully driverless robo-taxi service in late 2020. So its sensors and technology offers driverless cab rides in Phoenix, except if there's inclement weather. And just so most of you are aware, there are 5 levels of automated driving, from level 0, which is no automation, right, regular car, to level 5, full automation, no human inside, able to automate. Level 2 is where many of our auto manufacturers are today, which is called partial automation. So level 2 cars can change lanes with hands-free driving, or the vehicle can control both the steering and accelerating and decelerating. But at level 2, a human still sits in the driver's seat. It can take control of that car at any time. So Tesla Autopilot and Cadillac Super Cruise are, both examples of cars that qualify as level 2. Now, how is this all possible? Again, through the ability to detect the environment through IoT, through sensor technology in the car, and the ability to process and use the data to react to the environment in real time. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. This, I'm sure everybody knows about, but I'll just touch on it because it's an important part of this whole emerging technology space. So artificial intelligence, or AI, machine learning is kind of a subset, an application of AI. And what AI is it allows the systems the ability to automatically learn and improve from experience without being explicitly programmed. So, back in high school, I learned like COBOL and like all these programming languages where, basically I was told computers are dumb. You have to tell them every single thing to do every step of the way. AI is kind of an, next level where you don't have to do that. The machine, AI allows the machine to process and learn as it goes and consumes more and more data. So an example is how to shorten travel time as an active driver. So in the future, a city might be able to change traffic signals according to real-time data that's collected through IoT sensors throughout the city that is then analyzed using AI, which then triggers the traffic light to change signals according to need or demand. So this real-time data is processed, and if you can react to the environment quickly, can help to redirect traffic, avoid bottlenecks, or help emergency vehicles travel through the city. Okay, next slide. Okay, blockchain. So this is a record-keeping technology. That's what the technology is. It was first applied, though, and known to the world as Bitcoin. So blockchain was popularized by a person or a group of people, identity unknown still today, by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. And they created a public transaction ledger of cryptocurrency, or in this example, Bitcoin. So the implementation of blockchain technology within Bitcoin made it the first digital currency without the need of a trusted authority like a bank. And now private blockchains have been proposed for business use cases as well, which I will talk about later. So let me just break it down. What is the blockchain? So blockchain is literally just a chain of blocks where each block has digital pieces of information. So in this example of Bitcoin, blocks store information about transactions like the date, the time, the dollar amount, who is participating. They store information that distinguishes it from one another. So much like you and I have names to distinguish us from each other, each block stores a unique code that allows us to tell it apart from every other block. And finally, and most importantly, on the blockchain, every transaction must be verified. And with blockchain, that verification job is left up to the participants and the network of computers. So through blockchain technology, we can actually have a look at the blockchain, see evidence of what's going on, which lends itself well to things like smart contracts or industry supply chains involving multiple actors. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'd love to hear from all of you on this poll. Now that we've covered examples of edge devices and emerging technology, have any of you worked on projects related to any of these areas or other areas I haven't mentioned at your organization or your client's organization? So yes, at my organization, yes, at my client's organization, or no, not yet.
We got almost half of everyone in yet. Great stuff. Couple more. We've got about 2/3 of folks. If you haven't cast a vote yet, feel free to drop one in the hat there.
I see some chat here. Alpha, I'd love to hear from you at the end of this and hear more about your experimentation with AI.
Sounds good.
All right, here we go.
All right. Oh, wow. 11% at their own organization. That's pretty good. Oh, 42% at clients. Great. So hopefully you guys can stay around later, and I'd love to hear about that. And about 47% not yet. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, next slide. So now I'm going to talk about 3 project examples where Nimble went in to help different clients with their proof of concepts, their projects around using emerging technology or edge devices. And again, our opportunity is to help with the connection between people to things in the context of Industry 4.0. Okay, next slide. So first Nimble project I'd like to share, iOS edge device, in this case, the iPad mini, deployed at the enterprise level with a custom mobile application. So what is the problem statement here that we were trying to solve? The organization wanted to move from paper to digital maps, right, GIS maps. They wanted to use smart devices, the iPad mini, and a mobile solution technology with the iPad for over 1,000 employees to use in the field for a safety and compliance-related activity. This activity is done by field personnel who are responsible for detecting leaks on gas pipes. This is what is called leak survey in the industry. So these employees were fearful of change, resistant to new technology, and mostly out all day walking or driving to do their work. So we needed to be very strategic in how we engaged and prepared them without interrupting their operation. And the approach, what was the approach that we used? So this was such a transformational change, right, with so many levels of change. It had not only the iPad mini and a mobile solution on the iPad, there were also a set of related portal cloud-based solutions for related groups like leakage clerks and schedulers, et cetera. And there were also process changes, and it represented 50 plus geographic locations. So there are several lessons I'd like to share, but in this example, I'll speak specifically to the iPad mini or edge device because it gives a good sense of the factors to consider for change practitioners. So first was the user impact of the iPad, the device itself. So factors such as the weight of the device, how they carry it in their hand or a strap across their body. And it's also one more thing to keep track of with other equipment they may have. In this slide, you see a picture in the bottom right of equipment that is used for detecting gas leaks. And now we're asking them to also carry an iPad mini to do their work instead of using the paper GIS maps that they would stick in their back pocket to mark up. Okay, so second, how does this device, iPad mini, hold up in various conditions as they're outside? So factors like heat and sunlight affect the performance of the iPad, right? It starts to shut down after a certain temperature. The power and battery performance as you're walking around all day, how is that holding up, right? And what kind of additional battery or portable batteries did we need to provide to them? Third, connectivity again. This is the key, right, for all of these technologies and devices to be able to work effectively and work together. The big concern was making sure that the device has no issues connecting to the cloud or connecting to the corporate enterprise network, even if you're in a rural area or a densely populated area. So remember, 50 locations across all of Southern California and San Diego, right? It gets pretty hot. It can get very rural in some areas. And if there are connection issues, regardless of the reason, then users could not sync the work or the data or the maps, right? And they wouldn't be able to complete their work. And we all know this, but while technical issues like connectivity are not our job to fix, often we are the ones explaining why something is not working, right? And so understanding these things, even at a high level, was necessary. Another challenge and factor to consider is these are Apple devices. So there are Apple dictated limitations on what you can and cannot do, which introduces some challenges and change for the users. So security of the iOS device, this is Apple dictated. User login, you can only authenticate by one user, right? And this is different from the ruggedized laptops, for example, that they already use today that could be shared by multiple users. The other issue around an Apple device is limitations in remote support. So you can go in and view what's happening on the iPad, on an iOS device, but you cannot troubleshoot it. Again, this is Apple dictated, and it had a huge impact on the IT support teams and the end users. Finally, in deploying thousands of these devices with a mobile solution on it, we had to consider the impact on the user around network performance, how these devices will need to be maintained and fixed over time, and the capacity of the support teams. So in this example, for a successful change management approach with new edge devices and new technology, this required the change practitioner to be very knowledgeable from a technical perspective in order to conduct an accurate gap analysis, manage expectations with users, and to create the right change approach and content for the webinars, communications, FAQs, et cetera. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned how private blockchains have been proposed for business use cases as well. And so I'd like to talk about that here. So in this client organization, the problem statement was that they needed to track information about its assets, its types, and things like that from end to end, from the manufacturer, the external, manufacturer, to an external vendor distributor that they worked with, until the types and assets arrived at the warehouse of the receiving client organization, right? So you have the manufacturer, the vendor distributor, and then the client's warehouse. This needed to be traceable from start to finish. So how do we enable all the parties along the supply chain to access and validate data in an efficient, reliable, traceable, and secure manner? So they decided to do a proof of concept with machine learning, data science, and blockchain. So what's the context here? I'm not a materials expert, but here's what I learned, and I think this will help level set before we get into some of the challenges and lessons. Materials information, things like the material, the pipe material, the pipe size, this sort of data was in multiple places across systems, on paper, and every company handled it differently. Second, how the data is shared, tracked, and validated is slow, cumbersome, and uses untraceable forms of communication between all three parties. So they use a mix of PDFs, email, paper, Excel. So the first step was understanding the existing process and documenting that and improving upon it. And then once the to-be requirements were defined, the tech vendors created a proof of concept applying the user design and expertise in data science, AI, and blockchain technologies. So I'm going to highlight some of the differences from a traditional technology deployment as a change practitioner. So first, in addition to the regular technology vendors, it doesn't matter if they're SAP, AI, blockchain, we all have worked with them. What was different for this project was the involvement of those external organizations. So participation of the external manufacturer, the external distributor, right, on top of the tech vendors and the decision makers of your client or receiving organization. That took extra time to coordinate throughout the project. Also, user design is critical, right, as part of this kind of development of the to-be vision with all those parties, not just the client organization. And developing all the scenarios, right, especially exception scenarios, was really critical. The next lesson is really big. We had to learn about how machine learning works and iterate as a project team from the IT side to the business side. So for machine learning to work, you need to start with some standard form of the data. And so we had to first get agreement on what was the most critical data for materials across all three parties. And what were the forms, right? We had to look at everybody's different forms and PDFs and Excel spreadsheets. Then we developed a standard format for machine learning to be able to read the data off of these documents. So the major lesson is that with no standard format or one document that everyone used for this critical information to trace the material end to end, examples would be the purchase order number, the inspection results, or the materials information. And the reason these things are important to understand as a change practitioner is that this meant more time to internally agree on all these kinds of things with the client organization, with the manufacturer and the distributor, and more time to iterate with the new way of working with these external parties. Okay, next slide. So the next project was a streetlight asset management strategy project. So for this client, they owned vertical assets, in this case, streetlight assets in multiple cities. So although this client had launched a few innovative pilots, there was no cohesive strategy defining the vision and long-term goals and how to take advantage of these edge devices. In this case, the edge device was a smart meter, right, that you would put on the vertical infrastructure. The other components were the emerging technologies such as IoT and AI. So the problem statement is streetlights, right, vertical infrastructure is now a valuable asset because it is real estate essentially for these smart devices, IoT sensors, et cetera. So how could we design a strategy to leverage IoT and new business models to maintain streetlights better for this client, as well as pursue revenue generation opportunities? So that's a pretty meaty problem statement. The result is we were able to successfully deliver a strategy and a 5-year roadmap. And we also conducted an external benchmarking effort on what other cities and utilities were considering with their vertical infrastructure and innovation efforts. So some of the challenges here, which will be familiar to you, were that employees related to this end-to-end maintenance of this asset family, in this case, streetlights, were scattered across the larger client organization and very siloed. So many of us have experienced that. This part is a little bit new. The educating and level setting, the leadership, right? The internal organization, the various groups supporting this streetlight asset. This took a lot of time because all of this is new, right? What is IoT? What is this new business model we might be considering? How does this benefit us? What's the impact of all of this? So getting internal agreement, level setting on all of that, and even figuring out which device to use, who would own the device, what about the data that's traveling to and from the device. All these things took extra time because there was a learning curve. Finally, I think when you're in a regulated sector, utilities, municipality, et cetera, these are the organizations that generally own these vertical assets. It's fairly a risk-averse culture, right? And there's a lack of incentives for directors or leaders to take on these innovative ideas because their performance measures are not in line with doing more than what they already do. Okay, next slide. So I'd like to talk about the impact on change practitioners and the organizations they support. So just for consideration, ask yourself if you're an internal change practitioner, is your organization prepared, skilled, and knowledgeable for Industry 4.0? And how are you preparing your workforce for the future? So for example, a lot of the workforce trends in this area of innovation require data scientists or some sort of innovation function. Maybe they need a process in how these new devices and emerging technologies are vetted and approved. Perhaps there's a better way to connect the dots across the organization for these kinds of efforts, because you often need, like a matrix model, like a heavily matrix model, both internal to your organization and external if you're co-creating new services or products and personalizing that service for your customers. Also, are there incentives in place for your management and leaders to explore this area? And what about culture? Is there a culture to support taking risks, failing early, and learning from that proof of concept? Next slide, please. Next slide. I'd like to talk about some of the recaps and takeaways for all of us, whether you're internal or external change practitioner. So remember that this is a maturing space. There is time to catch up and learn. Companies have not yet implemented many of these at scale. Many are still at the proof of concept or pilot stage still. And we all know the benefits of proof of concepts, which is really critical in this area of experimenting with newer devices and newer technologies and newer startups, right? So demonstrated credibility in the solution and the new devices, the ability to build trust by the users, and also give the IT teams, right, in the organization time to adapt to this new technology. And oftentimes the use case has not been proven or tested in their industry. So they're going to be extra careful on how they move forward, right, in their diligence around these things. Also, emerging technologies and smart devices assume we move to a connected environment, which is, again, right, I want to make sure that concept is very clear to everybody. And what that means is organizations will have to create a new way of working, evolving towards an infrastructure that supports these sorts of proof of concepts, and perhaps think of new ways of developing products or services as customer expectations advance, right? They become more sophisticated. And all of this means opportunities for change practitioners. Next slide, please. So in my own kind of learning and being a student of this space for several years now, I have some tips for you and some call to action items to consider. First is leveraging the network that you have. So finding out what is happening within your organization or your industry, making time to go to existing forums that you're already a part of and starting these discussions, paying attention to LinkedIn postings. Second is building your knowledge and investing in educating yourself or your teams. So things that you could do on your own. So reading books, attending webinars like this, watching YouTube videos or TED Talks, reading blogs, and accessing relevant industry reports on the topic. Third is seeking new forums and collaborating with others. So when you're ready to, it's good to network and go to meetups or attend industry conferences focused on innovation and technology, go to meetups, virtually even. And then on LinkedIn, you can join groups, right, around smart city, innovation, IoT, et cetera, whatever area you're interested in or your organization is considering. And then build enforcing functions to synthesize your learning. So something I made myself do is talk about this topic at the global ACMP level and now talking to you guys in LA about it, but this has helped me synthesize my learnings and also have an opportunity to share my project, real life examples with clients with all of you, and hopefully, sparking that discussion with all of you and learning from all of you as well. And keep in mind that as an early adopter, the mindset is to learn and mature as you go, and you and your organization will iterate, right? And that's okay. So next slide. what will be your call to action? So the important thing is to just start somewhere, right? Be willing to do some homework, take the necessary leaps to learn, and enjoy the process, right, as you go. So next slide. With that, I'd like to conclude by welcoming you to connect with me on LinkedIn or emailing me with any questions or opportunities to collaborate. Thank you to everyone who stayed to the end with the schedules, and I know it's tiring after a 2-day conference at the end of the day, but I'd love to open it up to questions and comments, hear from other people who have been working in the space on similar projects. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, it was kind of interesting because at least for myself, and actually I have some of my IT team, some of my OCM team here on the call with me, and they're like uber fabulous, just saying it. But, we work on a lot of different technology, initiatives. Some of the things that I've heard are things like smart contracts, right, which is the blockchain, right, that actually pretty close to the technology that you've used. A lot of my colleagues in the healthcare, I'm constantly working on new smart devices that they have to train staff in terms of using with patients. So, I mean, just tons and tons. I see Chris has his hand raised. Chris, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll pop on really quick, and hopefully I'm not going to echo.
You sound great.
Okay, good. So, hey guys, it's good to be here, and I think I just lost audio on my phone. I'm in transit, was in transit earlier. I ended up ducking out for dinner, but Betty, you just nailed this. I mean, what a pleasure to hear. I mean, I was on the move, and I learned, I paused, I might have taken a screenshot or two. I hope you don't mind me taking a screenshot of your slides.
Yeah.
Decorazzi are everywhere.
Sure.
But I really, Betty, this was fantastic. I mean, I've learned so much in this session, and I am so grateful to ACMP SoCal for making this possible, because I was the last minute Larry rushing the door to come in. And bottom line is I got here, and I wouldn't have missed this for anything. And I'm glad it's recorded, because there's more to come, right? Betty is I've known for a good length of time now, and she is just an incredible consultant. But I learned something new today about Betty that I didn't know, and that's that she learned to program COBOL in school. So fun fact, right? I might just put that in LinkedIn to tease the event a little bit further. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I see some familiar names on the list here, so I'm not going to monopolize time. I also have to jump because I have a conflict at 6:15, which is past. I just wanted to say, I guess, in close, that the level of complexity, the VUCA world that we're living in, the volatility and the complexities are deepening and widening exponentially in the era that we're in. So many things have happened that have allowed us to become better versions of our humanity in the technology space, especially. And it takes a lot of trust and a lot of capability. So for us to show up as change agents to change ourselves, and as leaders of change, as we impact that, we need to parlay the capability into even more magnitude of what we do. So as change professionals, this is even more important than it's ever been. And Betty, I mean, I got to thank you, because now I'm going to be much more conversant in some of these things you touched on today, and I'll let you guys review those. I'm going to bounce. I think you have a ways left to go.
Thank you, Chris.
Time. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you so much.
To ACMP SoCal on your
Thanks,
awesome event.
And we have another question.
Take
Jerry,
care.
did you want to?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just came off mute. Thank you, first of all, for this. I've attended a couple presentations on blockchain or AI or change management, but this is the first time I've really heard it presented in such a concise and clear way. Maybe a little bit more for the layman, if you will. So I really, really appreciate that. And with that said, I was wondering if you could maybe revisit a little bit about how you explain blockchain, because I'm still trying to understand that one a little bit more. And it's funny because I've done presentations on Bitcoin, but it's been very surface or cursory, because how the mechanics of how it works, I'm still struggling a little bit with. So
Sure,
if you could,
I'd be happy to, and I'd be happy to, and others can chime in too. The way I would think about blockchain technology is that it's a technology, and it is really a way of keeping track of data in these things called blocks. And the difference is that the technology allows you to store the data and validate it to the people that are participating in the blockchain, right? So there's no, like in the Bitcoin example, there's no central bank, right, or authority saying, yes, Jerry, you transacted $5 and it went to this other person, right? There's no one doing that. We are all validating that on the chain. So at every transaction, you're saying, okay, I validated this is true, and it has to be validated by everyone else on the chain. So it's a different form of validation, and that's the technology, which is why it can be applied to supply chain and process, right, across different actors. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help because I know the advantage is, I understood that the advantage was that there is like no bank, obviously, in the money example, but I was just really struggling with the storage and validation piece. So I guess every single transaction then, that every time data is touched, for lack of a better word, it has to be validated in that transaction.
Right. Yeah, and an example of the project that I talked about where you had the manufacturer, the distributor, and the client's warehouse. In that example, the supply chain, so if the distributor says, I received these materials from the manufacturer on this date, they told me it was inspected and it passed inspection, right? That's what they told me. I, as a client on the other end, or I, as a manufacturer on the other end, can validate that, right? And say, no, that's not true, because I see that when it was at the manufacturer's stage during the process, it was inspected and it did not pass, right? Here's a document I see, here's the data I see that conflicts with the data that's showing up at this middle point in this process. So that's a very simple way of explaining the process, because I'm not a technical person either, but I think that's the beauty of the blockchain technology, is that it gives this sort of like transparency and validation in a secure environment, right? And everyone has the ability to like object, you know what I mean? Or validate this information.
Yeah.
Just one quick housekeeping item. I'm just going to slide along. You actually have the ability to apply some of the things that Betty just talked about. So if you grab your phone and you point your camera, you turn on the, to take a picture, and then you point it at that lovely QR code right there, it will point you to our new handy dandy Linktree account, which basically takes all of ACMP SoCal's resources, puts them in one spot, and you can go ahead and bookmark that. So there you go. There's like a little mini use case of everything that Betty is talking about as change management professionals. Let's see how well we do with that one. I'm going to stop sharing the screen just so we can all see each other. Awesome. Cool. So I'm sorry.
Would it be okay, Tony, if Alpha chimed in, because he had a few comments on the
absolutely
chain here on the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to give everybody an opportunity to see each other's beautiful faces. That's all.
Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Alpha.
Yes.
Hey, hi. How are you? Yeah, no, I had one question at the beginning when you're doing the I think it was the use case for if the smart meters. I was just curious when they were using the iPad, because I know some people have some, I would say, they don't have their personal information being shared in a network and so forth. So I was just curious if people are required to have Apple IDs to use the iPad, because that's one of the requirements. And that would put some limitation on, the number of users you could have on that system, right? So I was just curious if there were some challenges like that you encounter.
Yes. So the to operate any Apple iOS device, right, whether it's an iPad or a phone, the user has to authenticate, right? Like IT or someone else can't go in. So that authentication of the device was a new thing we had to learn about and build time into and make sure, gosh, like what does this mean? So if they, something happens, we have to wipe the whole iPad clean again, and they have to re-authenticate. The actual user has to go in. Like I can't do it for them, right? As support. So that was a big learning curve for the project team, for the backend IT team, the support team, the the device hardware support team, right? And then the user had to be like, oh, I can't share this with Bob because I do that with my ruggedized laptop. Like, no, you cannot share this with Bob because your credentials are in this iPad, and that's how you're going to get into that mobile application, right, to complete your work. So that was a very big kind of shift for them, right, from a user perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
I had a quick follow-on question to that. So with these users who were used to a very manual process, right, with the paper-based maps and whatnot, was there a huge learning curve to use an enabled device? And I'm just wondering, because most people at this point have had some exposure to a phone or an iPad or something. So I'm just wondering, was there a huge jump, or was it something that wasn't the biggest part of the problem on their learning?
Yeah, so it was 1,000 people, right? So it's a mixed bag. I would say there's a demographic that had challenges with the iPad because they, may have had a phone, but they may not know really how to like use it to its maximum, right? They just kind of use it as a phone and text people, but they weren't like big on applications on the phone and things like that. So when we had to issue this iPad, this company-owned device, it had to comply with the client organization's policies of like what's allowed on the iPad, like do you let a browser or not on there? If so, it's the company browser with the company allowed information. I think like maybe 30% had like, we created like a video of how to use the iPad, like basic, like how to turn it on, how to use to the brightness up and down, volume, right? We had to do a video, which people did watch. But then as you can imagine, like the third that were like younger demographic, like love the iPad, love the mobile application, all of that. So I'd say, yes, some change management you had to think through about on the device itself. But most of the change was the mobile application part. Like now that they did everything in this mobile app on the iPad, we had to have like an all-day class for them to learn how to do their work using that mobile app on the iPad. So that was the bigger change for them.
Thank you.
Sure.
It's funny actually, for me personally and a lot of the people that I deal with, the debate that always rages is if you're an Apple user and you have to use an Android device and vice versa, right? I respect the Apple people. You guys are fabulous. Looks great, functions great. I cannot use your flipping laptops. I cannot use your phones. Every time, like, for a great example, I have an aunt who actually said to me, hey, can you look at my phone? I'm trying to take a picture. And I looked at it and I said, I'm 53 years old. I have no idea. I've been using this for 10 years, my Android phone. I don't even know how to get to like your screen right now, So,
Tony, is that a challenge for you? Like New Year's resolution, maybe to actually get over that resistance? Because this is at this point, this is like your right hand and left hand. You need both. You need both, Tony.
I attend the change sessions that like a person like Alpha and Naji, I become a client of theirs then in those instances, but it's really funny. I mean, I actually encounter that pretty regularly in terms of, the Android people, because it's almost like culturally now it's become like a cultural type of a division because there really are just those two major sets of platforms that are really ubiquitous, right? You're either Google or you're Apple. That's kind of the end of it.
Yeah, that is so funny because I will say that growing up, I grew up on Apple products before they were Apple because my dad was a hardware guy and he was an Apple fan. When I went to university, I had to transition my mindset to use, I will say, non-Apple devices, because all of our computer labs were funded by something that starts with an N and ends in soft, right? It was all of their technology. So I had to become technology bilingual, I guess, which is kind of very handy. But it's been very interesting. Like I'm taking this on a MacBook, right? Because it's my personal device, but I have to turn around the other side of my desk space is my laptop to log in for work, completely separate, different platform.
Yeah.
I would
even the apps, they all render differently. So if you're rolling something out these days, you know, into your organization or something like that, the way it looks and behaves in Apple is going to be very different from the way. So if it's a BYOB type of situation, and I'm not talking the good kind, then, you know, you have to kind of account for both of those.
Right. And that's why we created that short video on the iPad, because we debated, we're like, do we need it? Do we even need this? And we said, you know what, for that percentage of people who are not familiar, who are, you know, not iOS users, it might be helpful, right? So we created this short video. But yes, I agree. There is this kind of like cultural divide, so to speak.
And I think
all things.
I also wanted to offer
today. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I also wanted to offer that in my role, I do OD culture work and DEI AV. And so I was really glad to hear you say that you did go ahead and do the video, because when you think about access, right, and inclusion, not everybody really from a cost perspective can afford an Apple device and keeping up with them every 2 years, good Lord, right? So that just perked up, you know, when I started thinking about those connections, and we don't always think about it in that way. Or like when we think about diversity in terms of, you know, there's still multiple generations in the workplace. And as, you know, more and more millennials are in the workplace and in leadership roles, you know, that shared experience, right, and frame of reference for that cohort is maybe going to be different from their 50-year-old colleague or their 20-year-old colleague who thinks email is ancient and, you know, and why can't we just do everything on text, right? So diversity and then, you know, the access piece, both of those I think are coming through when we talk about OCM. But along a different kind of line that I wanted to ask Betty about, or maybe anybody on the call, is for those who have done these types of projects, what project methodology did you find that your project team used? So in terms of thinking about the OCM approach, did you also have to maybe adjust your change management approach because they didn't use traditional waterfall, or because it was proof of concept, maybe they just did requirements gathering and went straight to, you know, 2 to 4 week sprint cycles, and you really didn't have the benefit of, you know, kind of like the project artifacts, right? Or those early project experience that help inform our change management strategies. So I'm really curious, you know, particularly for this, what are people seeing and how are you maybe adapting your change management strategies?
I'll offer one example. So I don't think the methodology changed, you know, whether you're using ProSci or Being First, other than the agile approach. So with the proof of concept, you know, you're working in a tight timeline. So the luxury of understanding everything you want to know about the stakeholder and exactly what is this going to do? Exactly. Well, we don't know, right? Because that's why it's iterative and agile. So you have to be, as a change agent, and a change practitioner, comfortable with that idea and be able to communicate that to the participants. And thankfully, a proof of concept is like a small universe of people, right? It's not 1,000 people. It's usually like 10 to 50 people, right? Like total, including like the project team and the stakeholders. So that keeps it manageable. And I think when you have external parties, like I mentioned in the blockchain example, like the vendor, distributor, or the manufacturer, that really changes things, right? Because it's not, you know, they're all part of your extended project team in a way, but they're also your end users, right? And they're also people who are going to be sponsoring the project and putting up people and resources. So you do have to think a little bit differently about now they're wearing multiple hats, right? Now it's just not an end user. This person is, you know, the future end user, a current project extended team member, and potentially a sponsor of this effort, right? So now the level of buy-in has to be thought through very carefully, and you have to work closely with your whoever brought you in to like think of that, right? Because it might be the manufacturer that brought you in, or the receiving organization, or the distributor. But you have to think through carefully these different hats, and how are you going to do like a change management strategy for these folks before you even think about the end user, right? So to speak, like when you're one and done with the proof of concept and it's ready to be deployed.
So it's really that you really have to think about then more in terms of what are different personas you would have to kind of build the experience for them, and then the players that are involved, because now you have more the distributor, the vendor, the customer, and all that. So there's multiple parties that involved. Okay.
That's exactly right. And I think that's why user design is really critical. Like we talk about, yeah, we should do user design, or we have elements of user design, but I think doing an actual real user design session with a credible vendor that knows how to do this, that has the technology and the space and the, process to do this is really important. And then what they do is they build these profiles, like you said, like I am a vendor distributor, but I am also a, end user of this, blockchain, right? And so they'll have to have input into these different aspects of the future to be state and what they want out of it.
Well, I am just checking the time. It is now 6:35 Pacific, and I know we've got some folks in an assortment of time zones. I could geek out on this all day. I mean, like, my close friends like Anka and Shauna know I am like in heaven, like a kid in a candy store running around inside my brain right now, because I just want to talk about this all night long.
Yeah.
Betty.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're friends. Thank you for really sincerely. Thank you for really kind of bringing us your perspectives on this really critical topic, because again, if they're not, if we're not working on it now, it's coming. I mean, it is coming.
That's right.
It's all becoming so ubiquitous so quickly. So your leadership is greatly appreciated. To all of our participants, thank you for joining us and joining us in the conversation. Yes, please continue the dialogue. We're going into new waters now. Really appreciate it. So everyone, thank you so much. Betty, thank you again. Please check out ACMP SoCal chapters resources. Thank you, Toli. Really appreciate that. Hope you all have a terrific night. Hope you all enjoyed, thank you, Gail. Hope you all really enjoyed the series. It's been fabulous. Thank you to everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Look for a survey coming soon. Look for a survey coming soon.
Yes, survey coming soon. Thank you, everyone.
And links to materials and recordings, and to see you next time.
Bye.
Awesome. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you.